When Ron went to see Noah's Ark in 1977, he realized there was nothing he could do.
Today on In Grace, we're in Saudi Arabia, climbing the real Mount Sinai.
For centuries, scholars pointed to Egypt for Mount Sinai, but Ron Wyatt's journey flipped the map and the story. What he found in Saudi Arabia, a mountain scorched at the top, pillars at its base, and remnants of what could be the golden calf altar. If this is real, it confirms the Bible and reveals a terrifying reason it's been kept hidden. For centuries, Bible maps pointed to the Sinai Peninsula as the place where God met Moses. But what if the true Mount Sinai has been hidden, not lost, in the heart of Saudi Arabia? Ron Wyatt wasn't an ordinary explorer. He was a man driven by faith, not fame. And in 1984, after years of searching and studying ancient texts, he believed he found the real location, in a place locals called Jebel al-Lawz. But this wasn't just another mountain. The top of it looked scorched, not just sunburned rock, but blackened, as if by fire that came from above. Not volcanic, not man-made, but fire that matched a very specific moment described in Exodus 19. Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Hold on a minute. If you have not subscribed to this channel, do well to subscribe, like, comment, and share videos of this channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell. Ron stood at the base, surrounded by armed Bedouins who warned him, "No one is allowed here." He looked up at the blackened summit, and he knew this wasn't just a mountain, it was a message, and someone was trying to silence it. But that was just the beginning. A little farther down the slope, he found something else, something that shouldn't have been there. Scattered at the base of this mysterious mountain, Ron Wyatt found a formation of large boulders. But these weren't just rocks. They were arranged in a circle, fenced off, protected, and on them were strange carvings, cows. Not native to the Arabian desert, not tribal artwork. These were ancient Egyptian-style bulls, engraved into the sides of the stones. Some were kneeling. Others appeared to be worshipped. Ron's heart pounded. He remembered the words from Exodus 32, when Moses came down the mountain and saw the Israelites dancing around a golden calf. They had built an altar. They had broken the covenant before it even began. Could this be that altar? Saudi authorities had fenced off the site. No explanation, no signs. Just barbed wire and warning placards in Arabic. Even the locals avoided it. They called the area haram, forbidden. Ron took photos, measured the layout, and the deeper he looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't coincidence. There were 12 stone pillars near the site, just as Exodus 24:4 describes. There were charred remains of what looked like ancient fire pits, and then, tucked in the shadows of the mountain, a split rock, not cracked from weather, but separated clean down the middle. The kind of break you'd expect from a violent strike, perhaps from Moses' staff, and yet all of it remains ignored, or worse, hidden. Because if this is real, it doesn't just confirm the Bible, it forces the world to admit God really was here. But Ron's journey wasn't over yet. He still had to get back and survive what came next. Ron Wyatt wasn't a spy. He wasn't a government agent. But what happened after he documented the mountain felt like something out of an intelligence thriller. Saudi authorities detained him. They took his camera, confiscated his film, questioned him about what he saw, why he was there, who sent him. He was just a man with a Bible and a belief. But to them, he was a threat. Eventually, they let him go. But his footage, most of it never made it back. That didn't stop Ron. He shared what he could. Old photographs, journal entries, first-hand accounts, and slowly others began to come forward. Explorers, locals, even former military insiders, all pointing to the same forbidden zone, Jebel al-Lawz, as the true Mount Sinai. And then satellite images surfaced. One image showed the peak of the mountain, charred darker than anything around it. Another revealed stone circles, altars, and remnants of ancient campsites, all consistent with the biblical narrative. But strangely, mainstream archaeologists went silent. No peer-reviewed articles, no excavation plans, no debates, just silence. And that silence speaks louder than any denial. Because if this site is real, if Mount Sinai truly stands in Saudi Arabia, then it upends centuries of tradition. It forces scholars to admit they were wrong. It confirms the Bible in a way the world isn't ready to accept. And maybe that's why the evidence is ignored or erased. But what Ron found next wasn't just physical. It was something spiritual. It was something terrifying. Mountains in the Bible were never just geography. They were stages where heaven touched earth, and Mount Sinai was the stage where God descended in fire. Exodus 19 says the mountain trembled greatly, wrapped in smoke as the voice of God thundered like a trumpet. This was not symbolism. This was a physical event that left a physical mark. Ron Wyatt believed the blackened peak of Jebel al-Lawz still bore that mark, a literal scorch from a divine visitation, not lightning, not magma, but the consuming fire of God's holiness. He stood where Moses once stood. And it wasn't just what he saw, it was what he felt. The fear of the Lord. That same fear that caused the Israelites to beg Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, or we will die." Exodus 20:19. Ron later said that being at the site made him realize something modern believers often forget. God's presence is not casual. It's not convenient. It's not tame. It is terrifying in its purity, and sacred in a way that silences every excuse we carry. This mountain wasn't a tourist stop. It was a place of covenant, where law came down to confront sin. And the evidence around it? Burned rock, forbidden borders, pillars and altars, all of it whispered the same truth. God was here, and the ground still knows it. But even more striking was this. Ron believed God preserved this mountain for a reason, not just for archaeology, but for accountability, for a final generation to remember who he really is, a God who speaks from fire, a God who keeps his word, and a God who once again will descend, not on a mountain, but in the clouds. At the base of the mountain, half buried in ancient sand, stood a rock unlike any other in the region. It was tall, towering, almost unnaturally positioned between rugged hills. But that's not what made Ron stop. The rock was split, clean down the middle, from top to bottom, as if struck by an invisible sword. Ron immediately thought of Exodus 17. The people of Israel were thirsty. They cried out. They questioned God's presence. And Moses was told, "Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." That wasn't allegory. That was a miracle of survival. Ron measured the rock. It stood over 20 feet tall. The crack ran perfectly vertical. And surrounding the base were signs of water erosion, not from flash floods, but from a source that had flowed steadily and forcefully, in the middle of the desert, with no river nearby. And yet, the scriptures say Moses obeyed, and water poured from the rock, enough to satisfy an entire nation. Paul later wrote in 1 Corinthians 10:4, "They drank from the spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ." Ron believed this wasn't just a historic site, it was prophetic. The physical rock split in the wilderness was a shadow of the spiritual rock who would later be struck for the sins of mankind. And the fact that this evidence still stands, unstudied, unguarded, largely dismissed, speaks volumes, because the enemy of truth doesn't need to disprove it. He only needs to bury it. But the rocks are still crying out, and the desert still holds its witness. And what lies beyond this stone, just a few miles from this split, may be the most undeniable proof yet. After witnessing the blackened summit, the forbidden altar, and the split rock, Ron Wyatt turned his attention to what lay around the mountain, the wilderness of Horeb. It wasn't empty, it was carved with evidence. Ron found pathways, beaten into the stone by time, trails wide enough to have supported large groups of people, camp areas flanked by stone markers, and perhaps most chilling of all, ancient inscriptions in early Hebrew. Some were warnings, some were commands, but others, they looked like prayers. These weren't tribal etchings, they weren't pagan symbols. They were early Israelite writing styles, perfectly preserved in a region where no Hebrew settlement had ever been officially recorded. Deuteronomy 1:2 says it was an 11-day journey from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea. That path, long dismissed by scholars, suddenly made sense when mapped from Jebel al-Lawz. The terrain, the distance, all of it matched. And then Ron found a second set of stone structures, pillars, half-toppled but unmistakably arranged in groups of 12. Just like the 12 tribes, just like the 12 stones Moses was commanded to place at the base of the mountain. The archaeological puzzle was fitting together. But here's what truly shook Ron. This wasn't just evidence of a people passing through. This was a footprint of divine order, of a nation freshly birthed from slavery, wandering into destiny under the eye of a holy God. And the moment they stepped out of that covenant, they lost the mountain. Now, thousands of years later, that mountain stands untouched, almost like it's waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard, waiting for one final call from heaven to remind the world that he is still speaking. But the moment Ron left the site, something began to stir behind the scenes, something that would make returning nearly impossible. Ron Wyatt wasn't just tracing history, he was retracing covenant. The area around Jebel al-Lawz was supposed to be barren, no tribes, no early settlements. But what he found, scattered through the wilderness, told another story, one that aligned perfectly with the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. First, there were the inscriptions. Etched into stones, barely weathered by time, Ron found early Proto-Hebraic script, the kind that predates modern Hebrew. These weren't just random markings, they contained names, warnings, and symbols tied to the Torah. One phrase, partially translated, read, "Yahweh is our God." Another resembled a command, "Do not go up the mountain." It's the same command God gave in Exodus 19:12, when he said, "Set limits for the people. Anyone who touches the mountain shall be put to death." No other civilization in that area wrote such phrases. No other tribe even knew that name, Yahweh. And yet here it was, carved into stone, in the middle of Saudi Arabia, far from where traditional scholars claimed the Israelites ever walked. Then came the layout of the campsites. Ron mapped them. They weren't random. They were arranged, spaced in a way that mirrored the biblical order of the 12 tribes surrounding the tabernacle. It wasn't perfect. Time had eroded some patterns, but the symmetry was there. Just as Numbers 2 described, 3 tribes per side, with space at the center. This was no wandering band of nomads. This was a nation under instruction, traveling in divine formation. And further in, near the charred summit, Ron located a massive stone slab, shaped unnaturally flat, with indentations that could have held wooden posts. Could this have been the base of the altar Moses built? Could this be the platform where the covenant was read aloud? If so, it wouldn't just be a biblical site. It would be the birthplace of biblical law. A voice from heaven had thundered here. A nation had agreed. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Exodus 19:8. And then they broke it. That brokenness is still echoed in the silence of the desert. And maybe that's why God preserved it, not just as proof, but as a reminder of what it means to belong to Him, a reminder of what happens when truth is ignored, and a warning for this generation. Because prophecy doesn't move backward, it unfolds. And as Mount Sinai's true location stands sealed behind fences, one question remains: who sealed it and why? Soon after Ron Wyatt's discovery gained traction, the region around Jebel al-Lawz was suddenly off-limits. Saudi authorities erected fences. Barbed wire circled key areas: the blackened peak, the altars, the split rock. Large warning signs appeared in Arabic. No entry, government property. Guards were stationed near the site. Locals who once roamed freely were told to stay away. And for those who tried to return, arrests, equipment confiscated, passports revoked. Even researchers with permits were quietly turned back with no explanation. Why would a barren mountain in the desert need military-level protection? It wasn't oil. It wasn't infrastructure. It was something far more dangerous. Evidence. Evidence that could validate the Bible in a way the modern world doesn't want to deal with. Not theory, not legend, but a physical location that proves God came down with fire, with judgment, and with covenant. And in a world driven by power and control, that kind of truth is a threat. Saudi Arabia has never officially acknowledged the site as Mount Sinai. No scholarly excavations are allowed, and attempts to document it are often erased. Footage disappears, websites go offline, and eyewitnesses face pressure to stay silent. Ron Wyatt wasn't the only one. Other explorers, Bob Cornuke, Jim Caldwell, and more, all found similar evidence. All were warned. Some detained. All of them said the same thing: the world isn't ready for this mountain. But maybe it's not just about archaeology, maybe it's spiritual. Because if Mount Sinai really is in Saudi Arabia, and if this is the place where God gave His law, then its rediscovery is more than a headline. It's a signal, a sign, that something buried is being revealed. And just beyond the mountain, a final pattern may be unfolding, a prophetic one tied not just to the Exodus, but to the return of the King. Why now? Why would a mountain, hidden for millennia, suddenly draw attention in our generation? Ron Wyatt believed it wasn't random. He believed it was prophetic. The Bible says in Luke 8:17, "For nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light." Mount Sinai coming to light now, in a time of global chaos, deception, and spiritual decline, may not be a coincidence. It may be a warning. The same mountain where God gave His commandments is now walled off. The same place where truth thundered from heaven is now silenced. And in our world today, where truth is blurred, where sin is celebrated, and where the church is often lukewarm, perhaps the uncovering of Mount Sinai is God's final reminder that He doesn't change, that His covenant still stands, and that judgment always follows rebellion. Remember what happened the first time at Sinai. God gave the law, and the people broke it within days. What came next? Plague, division, death. Now fast forward to today. We've broken covenant, globally, culturally, personally. And just as Sinai was revealed after Egypt's collapse, Could it be surfacing again as we watch the world spiral toward moral collapse? This is more than archaeology. This is a mirror. God is showing us something, not just from the past, but for the future. The uncovering of Mount Sinai may be the first piece in a chain of signs. Signs that the end is near and that the bride must awaken. Because God doesn't whisper forever. Eventually, he shakes mountains again. And when he does, only one thing will matter. Were you ready? But there's one final piece to Ron's journey. One more chilling clue that ties this mountain to the last days. And it was hidden in plain sight. Mountains were never just scenery in Scripture. They were divine intersections, places where God met man, not with comfort, but with fire, law, and life-changing truth. Ron Wyatt believed that Mount Sinai, the real Mount Sinai, was revealed in our generation because God is reawakening his people to the pattern, a prophetic pattern. When God moves in history, he often begins at a mountain. He called Moses at Sinai, not in the palace, not in the wilderness, but at the very mountain that would become the cradle of his covenant. There, God revealed his name, I am. There, he thundered with power, and the people trembled. But that mountain wasn't finished. Elijah would flee to it centuries later. When he was broken, alone, and ready to die, God drew him back to Sinai, back to the cleft in the rock, back to the place where the voice wasn't in the wind or the fire, but in the still, small voice. Elijah was restored on that mountain to prepare the way for a coming judgment. And then we fast forward to Hebrews 12. It says, "You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, but you have come to Mount Zion." The writer contrasts Sinai, the place of law and terror, with Zion, the place of grace and mercy. But then he gives a warning. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. For once more, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. God is going to shake everything again, and before he does, he may be allowing the physical Mount Sinai to be revealed one more time. Not to scare us, to wake us, to show us he never forgot the covenant, to remind us that Jesus, the rock who was struck, now reigns and is returning with power. The pattern is clear. God reveals truth. Man rebels. Judgment follows, and a remnant returns. We are in that cycle again. And the mountain, blackened by fire, hidden in the sands of Saudi Arabia, fenced by those who fear its power, now stands as a testimony to the unchanging holiness of God. This isn't about archaeology anymore. It's about alignment, hearts, nations, prophecy. And before the final trumpet sounds, God may be using this mountain to echo the same words he gave to Moses. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. But that's not all Ron discovered. There was one more item, one more symbol, hidden near the base, a scroll-shaped stone, and an eerie silence that surrounded it. The mountain is more than a monument. It is a mirror, showing the church what it once feared and what it must fear again, the holiness of God. Ron Wyatt didn't just stumble onto a forgotten piece of history. He may have uncovered a prophetic trigger point, one meant for this generation. Because what happened at Sinai isn't just something to study. It's something we're living through again. In Exodus 32, the people of God grew tired of waiting. Moses was on the mountain, meeting with God, receiving his covenant. But the people below wanted something faster, flashier, easier. So they built their own god, a golden calf. They didn't reject Yahweh, they just reshaped him in an image that made them more comfortable. And that's what's happening again. Today, many churches no longer preach the God of Sinai. They preach a version, softer, safer, stripped of judgment, holiness, and truth. A God who doesn't require repentance. A God who tolerates what the Word clearly condemns. But just like in the days of Aaron, it's not the people who rewrite truth. It's leaders who fear being unpopular. And when that happens, judgment always follows. The book of Revelation speaks of a coming deception, a beast, a false prophet, an image that speaks, and a world that worships the lie. Revelation 13:14 says, "The people will be told to make an image to the beast." The pattern is repeating, an idol, rising in the hearts of mankind. And Mount Sinai, now resurfacing, reminds us what God does when idols rise in the shadow of His truth. He shatters them. He sends fire, division, a call to choose, life or death, blessing or curse. The timing of Sinai's discovery matters. The Euphrates River is drying. Jerusalem is on edge. The nations are trembling. The love of many is growing cold, and the false messiahs are multiplying. Jesus warned us, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be." And in those days, just like now, people were too busy building, buying, celebrating, ignoring the ark being prepared right in front of them. Sinai may be the ark warning of our generation, not a boat this time, a mountain, blackened by God's presence, guarded by those who fear it, ignored by those who should proclaim it. And in the shadow of that mountain, one question roars louder than thunder. Is the church ready to meet the God of fire again? Or will it dance around the golden image one last time? Because just as God came down on Sinai, He will descend again, but not to write on stone, to judge the earth. And when He does, every mountain will shake, and only one rock will remain. Ron Wyatt never forgot what he saw that day, near the base of the mountain, a peculiar stone unlike any other. It wasn't blackened like the summit, or engraved like the altar stones. It was smooth, rounded on the edges, and shaped like a scroll made of stone. He called it symbolic, but others believe it's more. Because in Revelation 5, John sees a scroll sealed with 7 seals. No one in heaven or on earth is worthy to open it except one, the Lion of Judah, the Lamb who was slain. And as Ron stared at that stone, shaped like a scroll, but sealed by time, he felt something, not curiosity, grief, as if the scroll was waiting to be opened not by hands, but by judgment. And that wasn't the only strange thing. For miles around that section of the mountain, the atmosphere changed. The wind stopped. The wildlife vanished. The silence was unnerving, not peaceful, but heavy, as if the land remembered what the people had forgotten. And then came the smoke. On one of Ron's final visits, as he attempted to approach the fenced-off altar area, he and another witness saw what they could only describe as a thin plume of smoke rising from the blackened rocks above, even though there was no fire, no heat, no source, just a faint rising, like incense, or warning. Exodus 19:18 says Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke, because the Lord descended upon it in fire. Ron believed the smoke was a spiritual residue, not of God's presence still there, but of His warning not yet lifted. The mountain may be sealed to tourists, but heaven hasn't forgotten it. And maybe the scroll-shaped stone isn't just a remnant. Maybe it's a countdown, waiting to be unsealed. But the final seal, that doesn't come from earth. It comes with the sound of a trumpet, and when it blows, every hidden mountain will speak. Ron Wyatt's journey to Mount Sinai wasn't just about proving the Bible is real. It was about proving God still speaks. The mountain stands in silence, but its silence is loud. Its blackened peak, its sealed borders, its hidden altars, all cry out a single truth. God came down once. He's coming down again. Hebrews 12 doesn't just compare Sinai to Zion. It warns that the voice which once shook the earth will soon shake not just the earth, but the heavens also. And that shaking has already begun. The world is groaning. The church is asleep, and judgment is at the door. Ron believed Mount Sinai was revealed in this generation, not so we could marvel, but so we could choose to return, to repent, to revere the God of fire before he sends it again. Because the next time he comes, it won't be to write on stone tablets. It will be to bring the sword of justice, to open the final scroll, to seal the fate of nations. And just like at Sinai, there will be two groups, those who fear the fire and hide, and those who stand in awe and obey. The fire of God is not just wrath, it's purification, but only for those who are ready. Everyone else, they'll tremble like Israel did, but without a Moses to intercede. And that's the haunting part. When the trumpet sounded at Sinai, the people begged God to stop speaking. They couldn't take it. But what happens when the last trumpet sounds and no one's ready? What happens when the mountain that once trembled in fire is just the beginning of the shaking? What if Ron's discovery wasn't meant to stay underground? What if it was the final wake-up call to the church, to the nations, to the remnant? Because the next time fire falls, it won't land on a mountain. It will fall on the whole earth, and only those who know the rock will stand.